With 47 tons of American steel on Dodge rim, your 700 horsepower clean burning Hemi, all-wheel traction control and 15 inches of ground clearance. Maybe it's the 8-foot extended bed of a brand new Dodge rim. Premium cab of a Dodge rim.
Hi everyone, it's been a while. I know not a lot of video this summer, but guess what? I'm back now, so I decided I was going to do a little video on this truck. It is the biggest project I've ever attempted. It is huge, 22 inches wide by roughly 50 inches long, roughly. It takes all the space on my bench. It's difficult to even film it on the bench because it takes so much space. Why did I want to make such a huge thing? Well, these snowmobiles, they're considered 1/5 scale. Even this one is a 1/5 scale. Everybody is doing some videos of snowmobiles and stuff. I've seen some guys put 1/6 scale snowmobiles on top of 1/6 scale trucks, and it looks cool. But I was like, I'm building 1/5 scale snowmobiles. I want a 1/5 scale truck. And I've always been a fan of the Silverado of 2015 with that beautiful grille in the front. Now, I wanted to have a truck like that, so I decided I was going to make a mini one. I'm not a wizard, like I cannot design everything, absolutely everything. So I found a CAD models of this Silverado truck. It's a 2500, 2014, 2015-ish, up to maybe 2017. And I really like the design of the truck, but it was a mesh from like a video game or something like that. So I had to do a lot of post-processing to make sure everything was working and was printable. It's not perfect. I know there's a few cracks because such huge pieces of plastic are difficult to print without warping. And even though I've got minimal infill and trying to keep them as light as possible, they still crack under a lot of stress. So there's not much I can do. I could do some potty job and then sanding and clear coat and painting and everything, but that would also weigh down the body. So I might do a new body in the future, but for now this is what I have and it looks cool. And there's a ton of work, a ton of plastic in this. Like each section, like this was one full print, took maybe 24 hours to make, 24 hours, then another one, and you know, you keep going like this. There's maybe 20 pieces just to make the body, weeks to make. So now it looks complete, it looks beautiful. You've seen it in the video with the Schottky and Decagon. Really a big fan of that video. I really like how it turned out. And you know what? You know, I like the wheels and stuff, but I want to use this truck in the snow in the winter. So I decided I'm gonna make a set of tracks. So these tracks are the same track I made for this little guy, the Art Attack, with the chevron track in the back. But the track are even wider. I made them as wide as I could without completely destroying the look. So I went into software, made them as wide as possible. And right now they're, well, 4 3/4 inch wide. So they're a big boy track. And I made them as long as possible without going with a weird look or something like that. So once the track were done, I was really happy with the performance and everything. Like it can cleave some very, very steep terrain, even in the summer or in the winter. I'm really impressed with it. If I take the body off, I save many pounds, so I can really climb up to anything. With the body, it's a little more difficult. You know, it's a heavy machine. I don't know how heavy it is, but I'm guessing between 40 and probably 55 pounds. So it is a chunker of a truck. I like to drive also when it's dark because, well, 5 o'clock at night, it's dark, so I decided to install a headlight kit. So I already had these tiny little bulb. These are 5mm bulb, and they were not super bright, you know, but they worked. And then I decided I still have the space for those, so I was gonna install new headlights. I used, these are 50/50 square lights, and there's 6 of them here. And at the top, I used something a little different. You probably have seen one of those little guy. They're like shop lights with magnets and stuff. I took that little unit here and placed them on the top here with 3, made my own light bar because, believe it or not, there's not a ton of 1/5 scale huge light bar, especially those that, you know, exist, if there's any. Was not a fan of the look. So I decided to make my own. Turned out beautifully. I can also adjust it if I want to. Well, let's turn it around. So, sled deck, you know, a couple pieces of floor that I had. These are like a wood floor, very thin stuff. Made my frame around it, put a little brace here so I can drop down my my ramp. I don't know where the ramp is. There it is. So the ramp, there's 2 aluminum pieces on the bottom to make some rigidity, and then everything is printed. Of course, the center lugs, they're printed. This is printed. It looks awesome, honestly, and it works beautifully. It keeps the track on, and it keeps the skis on, no problem. So here's the underside. Pretty simple, just two aluminum pieces and the ribs. So pretty simple, and it works. Now, if I want to, I can take the sled deck off, so I can put a single snowmobile here in the back. There's a few screws on the side. I just have to pull them out. And I can just lift it up like that. Now you can put all kinds of activities in the back. You can put a, I don't know, a tent or something. I've even put my nephew in there, and believe it or not, it can actually withstand the weight. Like, it's really strong, it's built durable, so I like it. I had a little trouble with my rear bumper, but I'm gonna have to make a new one. But don't tell anyone. Tail lights, they're essentially the same thing, just a couple headlights, 5mm bulbs, and the wires will go within. Let's take the body off and see what's built from the inside. So it's a bit difficult to film on their side because of the mirror on the other side. So essentially, I wanted this to be pretty stiff and solid, so I had to make some aluminum braces. So you drill a bunch of holes in that aluminum, and then you take a 3D pen, you fill up the hole, and then you smush it down. So it's going to make essentially a rivet that connects the back plastic to this, and it's going to prevent it from shearing. And you do that pretty often, and it's going to hold, stiffen it up. I've never had a problem with this coming apart or trying to crack. I've had other problems, but this was not one of them. And now you can see all the wiring. I do have a voltage regulator, so it's connecting directly to the 12-volt battery for the powertrain, and it brings it down, and then you've got a bunch of resistor because all the lights are different voltages because there's different cells and stuff. So they are all calculated off of 12 volt, and then this regulates it to maybe, I don't know, 11 volt, and you know, everything's safe and everything's powered on, no problem. And the last thing, how do you mount this whole body onto the frame? It's pretty simple. I've got 2 carbon fiber dowels here in the front. They're held in place, and they've got this support here. So these 2 go through the shock towers on the frame. I'm going to show you in a second. So these 2 go through there, and these 2 studs here also in the back do the same thing. They go through the shock tower in the back. So all the weight is distributed perfectly on the frame. So you can put a bunch of weight on this, and it's all going to go where it needs to go. So that's pretty much it for the body. Now let's have a look at the frame. So there's a lot to cover here, so let's start with the obvious. This is a Savage XL with a 5.9 nitro engine. Of course, the nitro engine has been taken off and everything has been replaced with a brushless system. The reason why I did that is because the transmission that came off of it was a 3-speed transmission, and it was pretty good, but you didn't have reverse and it was extremely noisy. I have it here. So this was the old transmission, 3-speed transmission. And it's not spinning fast, but you can imagine if this was going 20-30 miles an hour or something. Pretty noisy. So I didn't like that. So I already had to modify my motor mount to install this huge 1/8 scale motor. So I decided, well, might as well make my own transmission. So this is a 2 reduction stage belt drive system. So this is GT2 belts. There's one reduction from like 16 tooth to 60, and then a second reduction going to 2 belts, 2 GT2 belts on each side, and those are 20 to 60 again. So like maybe roughly 1/6 reduction in speed. So this entire transmission has a couple tensioner on the side. You can adjust it, and you can independently adjust each belt. It's not great. If I were to do this again, I would probably maybe make a plastic gear, Delrin plastic at the top, or plastic at the bottom with a single gear. It would be easier to adjust it. But this is very quiet, so it's working really well. You can see it was stretched roughly almost 18 inches over the stock Savage. So you more than double the length of the stock Savage to make that fit. The battery is a 3S 5000 milliamp hour 30C Spektrum pack. I really like these packs. These are Gen 2 pack. So they only have one wire to charge. You plug one wire, it's self-balanced, it's self-discharge. It is one of the best batteries in the business for simplicity. It's a great little pack. So I highly recommend those. Usually I go with the 2200 milliamp hours for snowmobiles, but I needed a big boy for this huge truck. And believe it or not, this gives me maybe 20-25 minutes of runtime if I just drive it for fun. So this is a pretty good battery. If I were to do this again, maybe I would have a second pack for emergency, because this, when you run out of the battery, it is a pain to carry it back home. It happened way too many times last season, so I'll think about this. It's not final, but it's gonna maybe see an auxiliary pack, an emergency pack or something. So keep moving on. So this battery here powers this huge Mamba Monster X. It used to be one of the biggest speed controller out there, and it can deliver a ton of power. And it's powering this. It's a 4274 2200 kV motor, and it is clocked up to, well, roughly 0 degrees. So it is in stock mode, but it is a huge motor, and it has all the torque you could need, especially for such a huge vehicle. And if I ever feel like I need more power, I could easily go from a 3S lipo to a 4S lipo, or I can even go to a 6S, because these two can actually withstand 6S. And this motor and speed controller, they're paired together with this sensor cable, so it is ultra smooth startup, no jittering, no nothing like that. It is a beautiful system, and it works flawlessly. Last thing, the servo in the front had to be upgraded. I used one of those cheap Amazon servo 20 kilogram or 25 kilogram servos. It is still maybe a little bit on the weak side, but there's so much stress because of the new tracks and all the weight that, you know, if you are going forward and you steer, it's going to go. But if you try to steer on place, the servo saver is going to disconnect. So no big deal. But in the perfect world, I would redesign my steering in the front so it would be a bit more stiff. And I also had some plans at one point to make another front Savage fit the back section so I could have rear steering as well. That never really saw the light of day, but it would really help this huge machine, because it takes forever to turn, right? Because it's extra long, and the servo is not particularly good in the front. It's still an upgrade over the stock one, but if I had two servos steering front and back at the same time, it would really go anywhere and it would turn on a dime. So maybe something for future, but for now, this is what I have. I've talked about the tracks. These they're all handmade. I had to redesign the entire knuckle for the wheel in order to be able to install the subframe in there. And each wheel has sort of a suspension, except for the front and the back, because these normally don't really touch anything. So there is some suspension, and then of course there is the rest of the suspension of the truck itself. The shocks in the back, they were replaced. I had originally the shocks that were on there, but you can guess with all the extra weight, I need them to be a lot stiffer. So I made these little clips here in the front so I can put more preload on the front, and it works. It's enough because there's not a ton of weight in the front, but in the back I couldn't do that. So I went with aluminum, the biggest bore shocks I could find that would fit this HPI Savage. So I put 4 in the back, and you see all the lines. This is all custom stuff. If you drive with nothing in the back of the truck, this is more than enough. But if you put a sled deck on top and you put another sled or 2 sleds or any load for that matter, this is not cutting it. It's gonna droop, it's gonna sag, and I don't like that. So I decided to modify these shocks. I made my own piston with seals so I can pressurize the top part, and there was a lot of modifications to make that happen. But I can pressurize the top of the shocks, and there's a hole in the bottom, so it's gonna make the entire shock push down. And I can really crank up the pressure on that, a lot more than you would expect. So these little tubes, they're Tigan tubes. They're a bit more rigid than the typical silicone gas tubing stuff. So this is a bit more rigid, but it's still very flexible. This is my pump. This entire assembly here with the little impeller in the back, this is my entire pump assembly. It came off of a little cheap Amazon air compressor. But believe it or not, it really packs a punch, and it can really crank it up pretty quickly. It's a bit on the cheap side, I'm not gonna lie, but really you cannot beat how small the pump is and how it works beautifully. So that's what I went with, and I'm pretty happy with it. Now here on the side you have a temporary system. It's going to change, but this is essentially my one-way ball valve that I had for Project Meteor 1. If you know, you know. You can go back if you want to check it, but essentially there's a airsoft BB and a seal, and then if I want to drop the pressure, there's a little pin that pushes the ball and it's going to drop all the air at once. There's a bit of leak on this, so that's why I'm going to change that to one of these professional. This is a Festo valve, and I modified it a bit, but the glue is not, there's a bit of modifications to do still, but I'm going to replace that valve with this one, and it's going to be perfectly sealed. Up here in the front, you've got the gauge off of the air compressor pump. It can go up to 100 psi or 7 bar, and believe it or not, I actually tested it at that range, and if you put a little twisted wires on these tubes so they don't come off, it can actually reach it, no problem. But realistically, with all the load I'm going to see, roughly half of that, like 50 psi, is more than enough to jack up the back. It's going to hold the pressure, and it's going to be more than strong enough for that. I can also increase the preload here if I have to, but this is all I need. Over here I've got an accumulator tank. Essentially it's a piece of copper that was machined down to try to save a bit of weight, and I've got my tube going out the front, so when you compress it, it doesn't crank up the pressure instantly. It accumulates in this a bit, so it doesn't go from like 30 psi to like 70, right? It goes to maybe 40 or 50. It cranks up a bit, but not a ton. So that was the goal, and I think it looks beautiful. So it's a bit difficult to hold it, but still, this whole drive shaft, it was all handmade. So the gearbox itself has a captive shaft, so that means it doesn't move back and forth. It is set in place. I made my own drive shaft going all the way to the front. I used the stock dog bones and I placed it inside of a bigger tube, and I put a dowel through it all. It's a bit difficult to explain, but I'm sure you get the idea. So I did that in the front, and I did the same thing in the back. And to connect everything, I had these aluminum tubes, put a dowel through here, or a screw in this case, and I simply crimped the back on the flat spot on the main shaft. And believe it or not, that has actually held in place pretty good. I originally had some couplers I ordered specifically for that, but I never had the reason to change those, so these are pretty solid actually. I'm pretty impressed. So that's it for the drive line. So to install the body, put the front pins in first, then you move to the back, put the back pins in there, and there we go, it's in place. Now in some of my clips the body was rolling a little bit, so I am gonna add a little brace here in the front so it prevents the body from tilting to the frame. But at the same time, I feel like it adds a bit of realism if the body shakes a bit when you drive. It's like the suspension is working. The suspension is pretty stiff on this, so it doesn't twist a whole lot. Often the frame twists a bit more than I would like, but it's no big deal. It still crawls over pretty much anything. So for those that are wondering, why is there only suspension in the back? I really don't need one in the front that has air ride suspension, but if I do, I could easily install those. They're essentially the same thing, and just a little nipple up there in the front, modify it, put a nipple in the front, and I could have an air suspension in the front too, but I don't think that's necessary. I like the plushiness of the stock one in the front and the stiffness and capability in the back. So for now, that's what it is, and I don't think it's going to change, but if I want to, I can. Let's do a little test. So we've got these trays. There's a bunch of weight in there. There's motors and speed controllers and all that kind of stuff. It's quite heavy, right? So let's put it on. You can see the suspension went all the way to the bottom, right? Lots of weight in that little thing. So let's try to power it up and see if the suspension can withstand all of that. So this is temporary. I'm gonna have a controller on there that I can switch on and off from the transmitter so I can know what the pressure is and all that. But for now, this is what I have. And let's do it. No problem. Look at that. You can see the pressure here, what it's at. It's dropping fast because of my valve, but right now we're going down to 20. Let's crank it back up. There we go. All the way up. And go. You can see there's quite a leak in the back here, but once that leak is fixed with the new valve, it's going to hold its pressure no problem. It's going to go all the way back to 100. And you guess what? You can also build this if you want. All the files are free except for the tracks. But if you want the version with the wheels, everything is out there. It's already available. So if you want to build your own, and it's not a simple project. There's no steps. Even the files are kind of lost in all the stuff, but I'm sure you can find all the stuff if you want to build one of those. Maybe not the best first starter project, but if you want to build one, you can. Thank you very much for watching the video. It's been a blast to work on this project. It's been a pain at times, but overall it's been great, and I really like how this whole thing drives. It's very stable and it's fun to drive, and it's incredibly capable. So if you want, you can build one, and if not, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for riding with me. Oh yeah. That thing is so cool. It's 3 in the morning. I just finished it. I had to try it. April 25th, 2022. Not a lot of snow left, actually none, but here we go, testing of the frame. First time I'm taking it out. Seems to be doing pretty well. Turning radius is actually quite bad, but it's a fun thing to drive around. Got quite a slope here. Doesn't seem like it on camera, but no problem. Different perspective on what the slope you just went through looks like. I don't think it can get up, but we'll try it. Here we go. Oh, no problem. Look at that. Guaranteed the wheeled one wouldn't have come up. Wow, that's pretty fun.
Alright, begin.
Trying to catch up! Want to try?
Yeah.